My name is Nick Matos. My pronouns are he or they, and I am tuning in from unceded Ohlone land here in Oakland, California. And it is my pleasure to introduce each of today's artists who will be discussing. First off, I'd love to introduce the wonderful, luminous, powerful food artist and holistic health educator, Shannon Sims. Shannon, where are you tuning in from and what are your pronouns?
Good morning, Nick. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. This morning, I am tuning in from unceded Cowlitz and Siletz nations in what's otherwise known as Oregon. And my pronouns are she, they.
Marvelous. Now, Shannon, I'm curious, as somebody who, and actually Tenley as well, as folks who are currently in land that is literally ablaze, how does the current climate emergency in progress impact you both as artists?
I'm happy to jump in a little. I think from a more, sort of practical nuts and bolts perspective, the food industry is one of these genres that we've seen really impacted by the effects of climate change. And of course, the pandemic and the ways that, even just very locally, we're super blessed here in the Willamette Valley and, here in the Columbia Gorge region, we have a lot of small independent farmers who are very sustainably minded and, already are growing very kind of diverse crop rotations and are, utilizing many tools in order to sort of amplify our food sovereignty and, be able to have that local food shed, so to speak. So there is a lot of proactivity happening now, but even so, I think in the beginning, we saw a lot of backlog with the pandemic being kind of announced in March of last year that supply chain shortages, like, the factories becoming contaminated and having, like huge food shortages and, just sort of like broken down systems from all of the ways that food has to get from all the different places that it comes from to get to the sort of distribution centers and grocery stores and things like that. So, I think that was a big wake-up call for everyone, all of the talk about local food and the importance of having, it was like really got super real. And so I think, the efforts are being increased and I'm very happy to see that. But I think, we live in a bit of a bubble here. And there's a lot of the rest of the country and the world that, is not going to be as prepared as we will for, some of the things that may be coming down the pipeline. So I think the more we can encourage people to support local agriculture, to kind of ask questions, dig around, find out how you can support, if you have a farmer's market in your area. I know the fire season becomes like a whole other variable when we are considering outdoor markets, but barring that, they have through the pandemic been actually a pretty good system. Anyway, I could talk about this for a really long time. So I'll just sort of like, chime in with that, but we can circle back to a lot of these themes, I'm sure, in forthcoming questions.
Oh my gosh. And Martina, something in particular that you pointed out that sort of is an interesting through line with a lot of the narratives here was this idea that our behavior needs to change tomorrow morning, that there is an extreme urgency to this, and that paradoxically, that we're also in a time that is more overwhelming than ever, when we are more dissociated from the earth and ourselves than ever, and we're more isolated from one another than my memory certainly serves for it. So how can art serve as the catalytic agent and the clarifying agent that is needed in order to let us cut through that hypnotic trance that we're being put into by capitalist society and by the extremity of the moment that we're in?
I'm happy to jump in. For me, this is an easier question, I think, because, the food that we eat directly affects every part of our experience. And so I think while things can be very overwhelming and cooking and cleaning and simple tasks for some people may just be, a little out of reach still, I think one of the ways that I personally feel empowered and sort of able to kind of ground into my autonomy throughout this experience is by continuing to nourish myself and, there's certain things I do have control, like my supplementation and like what different kind of herbs and plants I'm interacting with, and how I'm feeding myself, which contributes then to like all of the ways that I interact with the other people in my life, the way that my immune system interacts with the outside community. These are big sort of bullet points on the list. And, I think another thing that comes up for me is like waste reduction, and just sort of this idea of like being responsible for our trash, so to speak, just like being responsible for the waste that we personally are creating, like Martina so beautifully demonstrated, like making these different kind of compromises in your business and the way that you go about interacting with the different systems of the world. Whether it's choosing the eco-friendly business cards and brochures and pamphlets, and paying that extra 15 or 25 cents, to make sure that like all the ways that we can, we are supporting to kind of reduce, there's so many interesting innovative businesses coming out with us in particular to food waste reduction. So a lot of stuff gets thrown away that's not, aesthetically perfect, but is still totally fine to eat. So, there's a lot of ways that we can sort of reevaluate what's coming into our home, how it's, being packaged and brought in to the house, and just really starting there. And then, of course, something I see a lot is like when people are in overwhelm, it's like, I can't deal with my recycling. I can't deal with like separating my trash, but like try and setting up systems for yourself, whether it's a bin system or you have like a collection service or whatever kind of ways we can stop just throwing everything into landfills, and working on bringing in less trash in the first place, but then, addressing the trash and just doing what we can every month, every week, just kind of reassessing like, how can I reduce the amount of garbage that I'm, putting out at the end of the month. um, have been very kind of like make me feel a little more proactive and like I have some kind of place to ground into.
Something important that you said, Tenley, and about this being the mistress of our own bodies, the mistress of our own destinies, and to be the creatrix of this new frame, that as we're in that process of visioning below the belt, that as we're in there, that it's kind of a counterpoint from how we often think about visionary art specifically. And I'm going to use a chakric frame because Hanadea Judith, thank goodness for her, but can be translated lots of different ways. That we think of the visionary as a third eye activity, as something that's really centered in the upper spaces. And that in a lot of ways, what we're being called to do is to vision at the level of the lower chakras, at the level of the root of survival, at the second of our connection, and at the third with our empowerment. So I'm curious for that shift to bringing our power below the belt, to bringing our awareness and our visionary skill below the belt, how each of you have found that manifests differently, specifically for the people around you who are also kind of dealing with the anxieties of the moment. Towards that openness and what I'm intrigued about is what you see as the promise of visionary art as people start to wake up that hope in this time period. I know that we're not all called to be environmental artists. There is an Andy Goldsworthy, and he's great and such. But that as these things touch our own creativity and our own creative spark, what is the responsibility of art in this time? Shannon, I'd be really intrigued to hear your thoughts on that one particularly.
Sure. I mean, I'm immediately reminded of the Nina Simone quote, that like the duty of the artist is to like speak to the nature of the times. And, I find with my work, I feel like I I continued to come back to food kind of as this baseline. It's like I do breath work and I do all this other stuff, but like really there's these common baselines that we can all relate to as like a human family. And for me, like the food is this amazing vessel. It's like it's parts of Mother Earth, hopefully, right? There's a lot of these like food like substances, that have snuck their way into our food system. So, I think trying to just advocate for like a whole foods philosophy and just like trying to encourage people to just as much as you can just like consume them, just like they just are these little gifts that come directly from the earth and you can just take them in just like that. So it doesn't have to be this big complicated process with lots of time and energy. It can be, and that can be like a whole ritual and amazing experience into itself. But the act of creating this, the meal that then nourishes you, but like this sort of taking it this next step further, right? So it's like we're bringing like one of you were saying before, kind of like aligning the body. So coming into the body, like using the food sometimes as like a grounding tool, but like, coming into the body, being in your mind, like slowing down, resting your system so that you'll actually be able to digest and process and absorb the food that you're eating. Because there's lots of studies that, clearly prove that when you're all over the place and it's like your digestive system is not activated in the same way as when you're in a resting state, relaxed, consuming this, beautiful nourishment. So, there's a whole ritualized aspect to food preparation, and I think that's pretty intuitive for a lot of people. But then, being able to create something that's like kind of uplifting and inspiring and like makes you feel this sense of like awe and beauty, like I've said this before, but like, just sometimes just the moment, just like that's like, so for me, like one of the huge roles of public art, visionary art, like all these different genres, like just to be able to stop people just for a moment, even if you just get like 1 second to kind of interrupt the flow of their thoughts and like reshift their train of thought. And then, obviously, whether it's super intentional or not, like sometimes people just create to create and people see what they see, but of course with visionary art, there's like all these different ways that people can sort of continue down this path of thought, like inspired by the things that they've seen. And that's where like, I think really the intentional positive imagery and like encouraging people that like, it's all going to be okay. Like we're in this together and like kind of leaning into this community minded kind of place, that like there is no hiding up on the hill in the top of your castle, like that just won't work anymore. Like there's so much that we need each other for. And so, being able to inspire people to, come back into their body, make peace with their mind and like enjoy the beautiful fruits of that practice, can ground the next steps forward, which are always changing, right? Especially these days, it's like the landscape is literally quicksand. And I was prompted by something someone said earlier, by like sometimes it can just be really hard to take that first step, when you're spinning in overwhelm, or, I know so many people in this very moment who, like were diagnosed with COVID in the last week, or like lost a family member, or, it's like one more thing can happen and it's like becomes very overwhelming in an already overstimulated environment. So having these practices, like Tenley was saying, is just so essential right now. My meditation practice has gotten me through this, like to be able to like give it back to Shakti, like get, to be refilled and emptied and, be able to transmute. I love that that word came up, to be able to transmute all of the things that we're processing, is no longer like we really need to shift the narrative. This is like no longer like a luxury kind of extra time when I can fit it in kind of thing. Like we are on the front lines. This is warrior training. Like, we are in it. And, to give that gift back to yourself will only continue to sort of increase the way that you're able to engage more consciously with your life and kind of gain control, so to speak, like to kind of like feel this sense of sovereignty and, not need to be completely tied up in the tides and the swirl of it all.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, Shannon, you're the queen of the mic drop. I just love it. And something that you pointed out that I'd love to tease out a little bit more as we bring this conversation to a close for today is how people can source hope, as hope that there is a further future available for them inside of this. So I'd love to go one by one to hear a little bit more from each of you about where you personally source your hope, and also to hear a little more about what sort of things you're really passionate about and what you're bringing into the world these days. My dear Shannon Sims, where do you source your hope?
Martina, thank you for that share. I was so touched. That was so beautiful. I think so many resonant things were said. But I would say when I think about like where I personally am sourcing my hope lately, I'm an extremely community focused person. So I think as Tenley was saying, kind of like this like a renaissance energy of like, this sort of constriction and then expansion. We went through like that first kind of wave of like, things kind of opening up a little and like being able to interact with the community a little bit more. Now it seems like we're going maybe back into a constriction phase, but like in this kind of last couple of month period, like seeing people and what they've been working on and, the amazing, innovative and super needed, timely projects that are also happening. I think as we isolate, sometimes it can be easy to forget that like there's a lot of us out here really in the work, doing what we can every day, showing up. So the community is a huge part of my sense of hope. And then, I think as a tangent to that, maybe like just the general proven history of the adaptability of humans with the earth. And so even if we don't have all the solutions penned out on paper in a like neat and tidy way, I think our desire and necessity to continue to cohabitate with this planet, will override a lot of the biological, it's like there's a lot of things that will just continue to change in order to keep us here. So I think about the sort of general resiliency of Mother Earth and the ability for her to heal and, remediate. And as we collectively are engaging more consciously with her, we can really influence the rate at which these kind of remediations are happening. And, that the abundance inherent in nature is such a source of hope for me. I think about, just the sort of regeneration of these concepts, like you're saying, Martina, about like embracing our own indigeneity. And, I think as the more we do that, hopefully the more we're inspired to kind of, this is a big part of my work, is just like being a voice for those people who are often left out of these conversations and continuing to center people of color, people of gender nonconforming identities, people of Indigenous backgrounds, like how are we engaging and including those people in all of these kind of ways that we operate in our businesses and the ways that we have these access touch points, our networks, our finances, like how are we able to kind of really incorporate them into the visioning of the future and how we will kind of interact with the earth. So those are insanely inspiring conversations that I have. And I encourage everyone listening to kind of stretch yourself in that way, to include people in your sphere or your network, or begin that work.
Amazing. And if folks want to connect more deeply with you and your work, where can they find you online?
My Instagram is at love shovel, like a shovel of love. And then my website is foodartlove.com.
Check it out and go grab that Robin Wall Kimmerer book. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.